Amen. Okay, today as we pick up our story in the Gospel of John, well, last week we started out in chapter 3 and talking about Jesus going back up to Galilee. But I want you to go to, I got clearing up some confusion here. I want you to go back to chapter 3 and verse 36 before we go on into chapter 4. Chapter 4 will be our lesson today. Chapter 3 and verse 36 is where some confusion came in. Harry asked a question, and I thought Harry had lost his mind. Because my version reads in here one thing, and then the New King James reads another thing. So as we look at this, we can see in the New King James says, "He who believes in the Son," there's no problem there, "has everlasting life, and he who does not believe the Son shall not see life." Now the American Standard says, "He that believeth on the Son hath eternal life, but he that obeyeth not the Son." Now I'm teaching from the American Standard, and most of you are reading from the New King James Version. So there's a difference there. The New American Standard says up there, believe. The New King James, believe, and then again believe, but in the American Standard it says obey. So there's quite a difference there. And so Harry asked me about that, and I really didn't understand what he was talking about in there. And then Oliver asked me this week, said, "Did you understand that?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, our versions," and so, oh boy. If this is a textual problem, it sounds like a big one, but let me tell you what it is in here. That is, up there where the second belief, it says believe, but down here the American Standard says obey. Now, in the Greek language, there is a word that always means believe. It's pisteuo. And there's another one that always means obey, hypakuo. There's no confusion. It means believe and obey. But now then, in the Greek language, there is a word that is kind of halfway in between. Now, I wouldn't say, I don't want to leave the wrong impression that it means half and half. The word actually means persuade, is the idea of the word. But it's about halfway in between those two. Now, anytime that there's a context in the New Testament where the context is showing that the speaker is trying to persuade the people he's telling the truth, they translate it believe. They say, and they believed him or they didn't believe him. And when they're talking about trying to get somebody to do something about what they believe, they translate it obey. It's kind of a 50-50 word. And throughout the New Testament, it's translated that way. One time it'd be translated believe, one time it'd be translated obey, and sometimes persuade to believe and persuade to obey and so forth. But it kind of falls in the middle in there. That's the word, the second word there. But he that obeyeth is where the American Standard then puts it in obey. Now, most of the time, the translators will translate it obey. But that should clear up a little bit of confusion of why one translation says this, one translation says this. They're working with a word that is about 50-50 in there, and the context is what determines which way you should translate it. Did I confuse it or any question? Okay, let's then get to our lesson today. And that is the woman at Jacob's well as it goes back up into Samaria. Now, up here is this woman, and last week we introduced ourselves there, that it goes back up to Galilee, and he meets this woman at Jacob's well. Now, as I've got there at Jacob's well, back in 1607 it was 500 or 105 feet deep. In 1800s it was 66 because people have been dropping rocks in it, and so when you try to measure it, why it wasn't as deep as what it is in there. But of course it is the most famous well, I guess, in all the world, because it is the one place, the one well where there's no question that's where Jesus was. As one writer puts it, as you look at the border that they've cemented up around this, that's the one that Jesus sat on when he came there and started drawing water, drew water out of that well. We talked about that last week, so we move on now today, and we're going to be introduced to this Samaritan woman here. All right, now let's start at verse 6. Now let's go in verse 7. It says, and the woman at Samaria, and there cometh a woman at Samaria to draw water. Jesus saith unto her, give me to drink. Now, last week we talked about a woman coming drawing water. That was their duty that they did every day. But Jesus is there, and he says, give me to drink. Now, when he said that, it's hard for us to imagine what went through the mind of that Samaritan woman, because men just didn't do that. That was not an appropriate thing to do, to speak to a woman. In fact, the Jews, the rabbis, had a saying that says, never speak to a woman in public on the streets, not even your wife. So there was a great distinction there. Then there's another distinction, and that is, this woman was a Samaritan woman. So she was a woman that the Jews looked down upon, didn't want to have anything to do with them. When we think of segregation and those things in this country, if you think about the worst that we've had, that's kind of what they had over there. The Jewish nation would look at a Gentile nation in the most despicable way. They had nothing to do with them. When a Jew had to go to town for some reason, and so they walked down a street that a Gentile has walked on, or going into a store that a Gentile has gone into, the first thing they did was go home and they would wash and go through a cleansing, because they didn't want to have anything to do with this Gentile world. Now, these Samaritans, I guess we would say, were worse than Gentiles. And you say, well, what do you mean worse than Gentiles? These Samaritans were half-breeds. They were half Jew and half Assyrian. Now, when Nebuchadnezzar conquered the Jewish nation, conquered Israel, took Israel over into Assyria, he left Samaria there vacant. There wasn't anybody living in there except the older people who couldn't travel and the invalids and so forth. So King Nebuchadnezzar decided that he would send some of his own Assyrian people back. They would go back and populate that country so that it wouldn't just grow up and be nothing but vines. So he sent them back. So these people went back to get free land, and when they went back, there were some Jewish people there, and so they interbred one with the other, and the result was what they called Samaritans. They weren't Jews, they weren't Gentiles, they were Samaritans. And so they began to pick up their own religion. Well, as a result of this, by the time Jesus came, there was a great hatred between Jews and Samaritans. And we've already made the point, and you can read it as you go through the gospel, that when a Jew tried to go from Galilee down to Jerusalem, the Samaritans many times wouldn't let them pass through, wouldn't even let them walk through their country if they were headed toward Jerusalem. So they made them go around, as we showed on that map, and I was reading this last week. It's normally a 3-day journey if you go from Capernaum down to Jerusalem and you're walking and you go straight down through Samaria. It is a 7-day journey if you have to cross over the Jordan River and down and go up that other way. So it takes over twice as long to get there. And so there was a great hatred there. So keep that in mind now. Jesus is headed back home. So they're not going to stop him as he's leaving Jerusalem. Well, he can go back. So he's out there now in this desert land all by himself. His disciples have gone into town to buy some groceries, buy some food for them to eat. So Jesus is there, and there's nothing, no rope, nothing to draw the water out with. And so here comes this Samaritan woman. And Jesus then asked her right here, give me to drink. And so that shocked her. So she came back and says in here, for his disciples were going away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman therefore said unto him, how is it that thou, being a Jew, askest drink of me, who am a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. In other words, that's just a parenthesis that John puts in there to explain why it was such a shock. So she said, why would you ask me for that? There. And Jesus answered and said unto her, if thou knewest the gift of God, now that gift of God is Jesus himself. In other words, he's saying, if you knew me, is what he's saying. But he puts it, if thou knewest the gift of God, and who it is that saith to thee, give me to drink, thou wouldest ask of him, and he would have given thee living water. And the woman saith unto him, Sir, thou hast nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Whence then hast thou at this living water? Art thou greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well, and drank thereof himself, and his sons, and his cattle? So the woman now appears to be a little disgusted with him. Here's a common, ordinary Jew. You got to think of it in that way. Just an ordinary Jew sitting there at the well. This Jew, normal Jews, they have nothing to do with this scum of the earth. This Samaritan, and a woman. Just nothing to do. So he's sitting out there, and she comes up, and he says, give me a drink. Now, the obvious situation is he's thirsty. He needs a drink. He's in a desert land. He doesn't have any rope. You're going to have a 100-and-some foot rope to be able to drop your bucket down to get the water. He has no way of getting it up. And so this, from her viewpoint, this disgusting Jew who looks upon me as total trash is now asking me to give him a drink. It's disgusting from her viewpoint. And so she hits him with it. She said, well, how is it that you, being a Jew, asketh me, a Samaritan, for a drink? You see where she's hitting there? How would you stoop so low as to ask me for a drink? And she knew why, because he didn't have a rope. Well, he turned around, and he didn't say, because I don't have a rope, because I can't get the water out. He didn't say anything like that. He just said, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that you're talking to, you would ask me, and I would give you living water. Now look at it from her viewpoint. You think of it from her viewpoint, what did she just hear? Well, first of all, living water. What does that mean? Well, living water is the opposite of dead water. Now, in these wells and places, you have two kinds of water. You have a well that has living water, and then you have what's called a cistern that has dead water. What is a cistern? Well, a cistern is, if you come up to my fish pond, out in my backyard, you'll see some water that's been setting out there for about a year. It hadn't been flowing. It's just been setting in there, collecting whatever it collects. It has a scum on top of it. If I told you, go get you a drink out of that pool, what would you say? See? No, that stuff is putrid. See? Now, living water is different than that. Living water is like a river or a well, which a well You dig down in the earth and you hit water that is flowing through. Living water is running water. Living water is water that's flowing. Living water is water that is alive, that it's always moving, that it's purifying itself. And so Jesus said, you would ask me and I would give you living water. Pure, cold water, if you ask me. And she looked at him and said, you don't have any rope? Are you trying to tell me you're greater than Jacob that dug this well in here? He and his cattle, and they always came. They had to pull the water up and so forth. Are you greater than he is? And so Jesus now has got this conversation going. And this woman has, well, up to this point, pretty well taken care of him. She's told him, in no uncertain terms here, what she thinks about the whole thing. Now then, he said, I'd give you living water. The woman saith unto him, Sir, thou hast nothing to draw with, and the well is deep, and whence art thou the living water? Art thou greater than Jacob, and so forth? And Jesus answered and said, Every one that drinketh of this water shall thirst again. But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall become in him a well of water springing up unto eternal life. So now Jesus throws this idea in. It's incomprehensible. Today we still wrestle with it. Why would he say this? But he said, if you would have asked me, I would have given you living water, and it would be water. When you drink of it, you would never be thirsty again. It's just not just water that you keep coming and having to drink, but if you drink the water I give, you never, ever get thirsty again. Because it is an eternal spring that also is on the inside of you. Now, of course, the only thing this woman can think about is the only thing that I could think about had I been standing in her shoes. How is it that Jesus is going to give me water where I'll never thirst, and it will cause a living water in me so that it just keeps reproducing? Now, later on, we have so many verses that talks about what Jesus does for you that now we understand. In other words, I'll give you the living water, I'll give you my word, and my word will reside in you, and you will never get thirsty for anything else. Once you take my word, that's all that you need. Now, whatever water you drink from today, you're going to get thirsty and you're going to go somewhere else and you're going to say, I want to go get some water. So you may stop down a Safeway and get a bottle of water. You may go to a restaurant and do something, but you're going to get water here and here and here and here and here and here, and you're going to get water from here and here the rest of your life. But once you have drunk from the well of Jesus, you never, ever go to another well. You don't go and find, okay, I now have drunk from the well of Jesus. I've drunk from His Word. Remember John 6 telling about giving us that eternal drink and that eternal food and giving us eternal life. Once you have drunk from the doctrine of Christ, you never go to another doctrine. You never go out and say, you know, there's something missing. I learned the doctrine of Christ last year, but there's something that's missing. I believe I'll go try Islam, or I'll go try Buddha. I'll bet you they have the good stuff. No, there's nothing that will satisfy you eternally other than the doctrine of Christ. That's what he's saying. So I'm the one that can provide you with this water. Now, this woman, you got to keep in mind, this has been written in the Bible for 2,000 years. You and I have read this for all of our life. But that woman heard it for the first time. So what's she thinking the first time she ever hears it? Wow, I have to walk all this distance to this well every day, carry this rope and this bucket, reach down, pull up this water, fill my goat skins, carry them back every day. Whether I'm sick or well, I have to carry this water. And he said he could give me water where I'll never be thirsty again. Wow. Wow. What do you suppose she would have given for such water as that? And so that's what she's interested in. Wow. That's what I want. So he says, and here the woman saith unto him, Sir, give me this water, that I thirst not, neither come all this way hither to draw. So that's what I want. Give me the water, so I don't have to come and pull it out of this well. And Jesus saith unto her, Go, call thy husband and come thither. Well, it'd be a rational thing to say. Rather than me telling you about how I'm going to give you this water, which you'll never have to come to the well again, go get your husband, and I'm getting ready to give you water out of this well. So he brings up a new subject. Now, it's interesting how Jesus is going to just go like this and come around and get right into that woman's heart. So go bring your husband right now. And the woman answered and said unto him, I have no husband. Jesus saith unto her, Thou sayest well, I have no husband. For thou hast had 5 husbands, and he whom thou now hast is not thy husband. And hast thou hast said truly. In other words, Jesus said, when you say you don't have a husband, the man you're living with now is not your husband. You've had 5 husbands, and now you're living with a man who's not your husband. You spoke the truth when you said that. Well, when he told her that, here's a total stranger. There was no internet. There was no tweets. There was no Googling to look up anything. Nobody knew anybody. They're out in the desert. Only one man, one woman. She's never seen him before. He's never seen her before. And he tells her all about her married life. And it blows her mind. It's like if somebody could sit down and tell you what you've done for the last, I don't know how many years it'd be in her case, 20, 30, 40 years. Just sit down and tell you. Now here's the jobs you've had. And you went from here to here to here to here. It would just shock you to pieces. So she saw this then. Here's a man that knows all about me. So the woman saith unto him. Now she comes back with the way we generally come back. I've met an individual who knows everything, so I'm going to ask him the most important question that I've got. Maybe he can tell me this question. She said, Sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and ye say that in Jerusalem is the place where we ought to worship, men ought to worship. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, believe me, the hour cometh when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem shall you worship the Father. You worship that which you know not. We worship that which we know, for salvation is from the Jews. So she said, Sir, tell me where we should worship. Now you see, their big problem was at that time, the Samaritans lived up there in Samaria. The Jews lived right south of them. The Jews always went to Jerusalem to worship. That was the biggest deal you could think of. The Samaritans went to Mount Gerizim to worship. Now they're standing right down there below those 2 mountains. That's where this is located. So here you have Mount Gerizim over there on your left, Mount Ebal on your right. Now you remember back in Deuteronomy 11, when God brought the children of Israel in, he told the priest, he said, now, some of you get over on this mountain, some of you get on this mountain, and then the ones on this mountain over here, Gerizim, you're going to yell out, blessed are they who obey God. These people are going to say, cursed are they who do not obey God. And then over here, blessed are they who, and then they would read off the commandments. They who do this, they who do that. These people over here, cursed be they who do not. And so they read the blessings and the cursings. And the people were down there in the middle of that valley listening to them. So it's known then as the Mount of Blessing and the Mount of Cursing. Now Gerizim was the mount where you're to go up on, where they blessed them there. So now the woman says, should we worship on this mountain or in Jerusalem? Now the Samaritans had chosen this mountain. The Samaritans and the Jews, hating one another, had no association with each other. So the Samaritans had chosen this one, and they said, this is the mountain, which is the Mount of God. And here's the reason they had. Their reasoning was this. Now they said, remember, none of this is true. But here it is, these half-breed Assyrian Jewish people, they have made up these rules to say this is the mountain of God. They said this is where God first appeared to Abraham. Well, you and I know it's not. We know it's in the Ur of the Chaldees, but we're just telling you what the Samaritans said. They were teaching, here is the mountain where God first appeared to Abraham. Here is where Jacob first dwelt when he came into this land. Jacob came here seeking his brothers. When he was out trying to find them, got thrown in the well, this is where he came. This is a city of refuge was here, and that's true. God had called this one of the cities of refuge. Joshua read the blessings and cursings, and that's true. That's where the blessings and cursings came from. So Joshua read his last address here, probably true there. Now the bones of Joseph are buried near here. So it said, now these are the good things. They said, now paradise was on the summit of Mount Gerizim. See, they're making all this up. But this is the reason the Samaritans thought Gerizim is the Mount of God. They said Adam was formed from the dust of the top of Mount Gerizim. Adam raised his first altar to worship God on that mountain. Seth raised his first altar to do the same. This was Ararat, where the ark rested. Noah rested the ark, so it did there. Noah raised his altar here on this mountain, and Abraham offered Isaac on this mountain. Now we know that all of these things are not true. Two or three of them, they're nothing over here in the pink. A couple of things over here about reading the blessings are, but this is the reasoning. Now, put yourself back 2,000 years ago. You're a Samaritan. You're a child of the Assyrians who've come over and married into the Jews. And then they've died, and then another generation is raised. And then they died, and then another generation is raised. And so now, here it is, and this is all you've ever heard in your life. Would you want to worship on Mount Gerizim? Yeah. So you'd say, this is the holy mountain, but the Jews said no. And Jesus just plainly tells her, you guys don't know where you're to worship. You don't know. At least we do. We know you worship in Jerusalem. Then he said an outstanding thing in verse 23. But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshiper shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For such doth the Father seek to be his worshipers. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship in spirit and truth. So he summarizes it by telling her, lady, The hour comes, and now is. That's an interesting expression. We understand when we say now the hour comes, we understand it's pretty quickly. They would go ahead and add and now is, when it means it's pretty quick to happen, that it is there. Doesn't mean that it's happening right at this moment, but it's upon us. I might say in our political realm, the hour cometh and now is when America is in financial difficulty. Well, we're not in financial difficulty today. None of you have suffered because of the great debt. There's nobody suffering from it. The hour is not right now. In other words, we're not in it right now. See? Cyprus is, but we're not. But I can say now the hour cometh and now is when this country is going to have to pay a great price. That's what he's saying. He's saying now the hour cometh and now is, it is right here upon us. Because from Jesus' viewpoint, here he is, he's the Christ. In a couple of years, they'll put him to death, and he will establish his kingdom, and you won't be worshiping in Jerusalem anymore. So it's taking place right now. The hour cometh and now is, when neither here nor there, the place will not be important. There'll only be one thing that's important. That when you worship God, it's not on which mountain you're on. It's you must do it in spirit and in truth. For God is a spirit. So there he makes that great declaration. God is a spirit, and they who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. This would be meaning, when you worship God, you must worship him from the inside. It's not on which mountain you're on. So it's not because I'm up on this platform. Can I worship God down here? So suppose somebody's arguing, you got to be on this platform to worship God. Somebody said, no, you got to be on this one. See, in order to worship God. Well, Jesus says, no, that doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make any difference where you're standing. It makes a difference on what's the inside of you. Are you with your spirit, that part of you that is made in the image of God? When God said, let us make man in our own image, when that part of you, that inward spirit, that eternal part of you, when you are worshiping God, you must do it in spirit with that. See, I can't even get it out because I don't understand that much about spirits. You must do it with your spirit in the proper attitude, the proper disposition, your mind, the spiritual part of you. That's what you use to worship God. It's not the physical. And then you must do it in truth. Well, Jesus is later going to say, Father, sanctify them in the truth. Thy word is truth. So you've got to do it the way the Word of God tells you to do. So when you find what God tells you to do, you do it. And you do it with your spirit. In a little while, we're going to partake of the Lord's Supper. Now, that's a physical thing. We're going to take that bread, we're going to break a piece, we're going to eat it. Why? Because God said to do it. We're to do it on the first day of the week, and we're to do it. And then what about up here? As oft as you eat this, we got to eat it, do it in remembrance of me. Do it with your mind. Do it with your spirit. Put the bread in your mouth. Eat it, because God said to do it. That's truth. But here is where you're worshiping from. You're remembering Jesus Christ as he hung on that cross. So Jesus said, that hour is upon us. Now this is going to shock that woman to where she's going to take off running, and a great thing is going to happen. Okay, our class dismissed for today. Aveline?